Welcome to Where They Wander. We're Kat and Kev, and we've lived in our RV on the road for 3 years. We are starting our season in the Owens Valley, and our first stop this season is Manzanar. If you don't know what Manzanar is, you will by the end of this video.
Before we head up to Manzanar, we're visiting an iconic diner on Route 66.
If for some reason you don't know what Route 66 is, Route 66 was the first official highway that went from Chicago to Santa Monica. And you can still drive the route, but sadly you cannot drive the entire route because many places or many spots on that route are closed down or they need repair. Maybe we'll do that one day, who knows? Let's go check out this sign.
The current owner is restoring the motel, and if you're lucky to be here at night, you can even turn on their neon sign.
This was the original office for the motel, and this is the first building they have actually renovated, so it really looks very cool. Beautiful 1950s kind of architecture. Let's go up and see if we can see inside. Oh, look at this piano and musical instruments here. This is pretty cool, isn't it?
We followed the footsteps of others and added our sticker to the wall. If you don't have a sticker, you can DM us and we'll send you one for free.
Amboy itself was officially settled in 1858, and that was because the Pacific Railroad actually came through here, and this was a water stop. However, Route 66 was not opened until 1926. So prior to that, this was basically just a water stop and not much else. The ladies informed us that these pumps actually do pump gas, so we're gonna get some gas. How cute does she look? All dressed up like the 50s. I love it.
This is what remains of the Amboy School. The original schoolhouse was just 2 rooms and built in 1903. This photo shows the school's upgrade in 1930. The school was permanently closed in 1999 and left to decay.
It's wonderful to see people investing money into these small, tiny neighborhoods. There is nothing here. There is a post office and there is this. But the good news is they are renovating, so that's awesome.
This golden Buddha appeared in 2020 and no one is sure where it came from.
If you're enjoying this video and you would like to support us as we support small businesses like Roy's all around the United States, you can become a member on YouTube. Scan the QR code above or there's a link in the description. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel if you're unable to become a member. It's free. Manzanar Relocation Camp is located in the Owens Valley of California at the foot of the Sierra Nevada mountains. It's situated along US Highway 395, about 9 miles north of Lone Pine. Before you enter this historic site, you can stop along the side of the road just past the sign. It's called an Icon of Confinement, and this is actually a replica of one of the guard towers. From 1942 to 1948, there were 8 US Army Guard towers that loomed over this.
Okay, we've arrived at the visitor center and Kat's checking out these storyboards right here. If you visit on a day when the visitor center isn't open, you can still do the driving tour using this map. Okay, we're done with this storyboards out here. We're going into this building was the old high school. But here we go.
This auditorium was one of the last buildings that was built here at Manzanar Camp, and it became the auditorium, the high school, and it could seat up to 5,000 people.
Our first stop on the tour was a reconstruction of one of the earliest barracks. We're entering the barracks right here. Kat's gonna come in and talk about what we're doing here.
When it was announced that Japanese Americans were going to be interned, obviously against their will, they were just given 2 weeks notice, and many of them were dragged from their homes, taken forcibly from their homes in Los Angeles. The vast majority of the Japanese Americans were in California, and they were brought here, but they'd only been building these facilities for 2 weeks. Everything was unfinished, there wasn't roofs, there wasn't windows, and this is where they were brought to live. So this was one of many camps scattered throughout the United States. This one camp had 36 blocks and over 10,000 people living here. And in an attempt to keep their lives as normal as possible, or to at least bring some normalcy. They had activities for children, they had school, they had baseball teams that they were very, very passionate about. They put on plays, they did a lot of things to try and instill a sense of normalcy for these kids that were here. Just like any other set of 10,000 people, yes, they were all Japanese descent, but some of these people had never even visited Japan. Some of them didn't speak Japanese, some of them only spoke Japanese. You had everything from farm workers to doctors, all living under the exact same conditions. They had Buddhist priests, Catholic nuns, and everybody lived here together.
When they forced more than 10,000 people from their homes into Manzanar, they disrupted the education of 2,700 students. This meant they had to create their own schools from kindergarten to high school.
When they first came here, that first block that we were in was basically the reception block where they would stay for a few days until they were allocated permanent barracks. And that's what the barracks looked like for the longest time. But in 1943, there were some improvements made. You can see in this barrack, there is sheetrock on the walls. There was linoleum on the floors. They did try to make them a little better. Other improvements that had been promised never happened. When they first came to camp, all the men between 18 or 17 and 45 were asked to fill out a questionnaire, and it basically questioned their loyalty to the United States. And there were three sections of Japanese. There were the Issei, the Nisei, and the Kibei. The Issei were the first generation, so they were basically people who had come from Japan to settle in America. Nisei were a second generation, they were people who were born here, they were American citizens. And Kibei were Japanese people who had gone to Japan to study and then come back, so they had had a lot of contact in Japan. And there was one question specifically, question 28, and it asked them, do you give up all loyalty or denounce all loyalty to the emperor? And a lot of people answered no, and they did this to avoid service. What they didn't realize was the repercussions of that would make them leave here and go to more of a prison setting, because then they were deemed to be people who were loyal to Japan and therefore not loyal to the United States. In 1943, they were allowed to change that answer, but of course that then makes them open to military service, and they were taken for military service. So their families were kept here, but they went off to fight for the United States. The signboard outside of this ladies' latrine says, "Embracing humiliation." And Kevin came out and just said, that's just wrong. It is. I mean, look at this. To have to go to the toilet in front of everybody, to have to shower naked in front of everybody. This slab here was the foundations for the laundry room. And one of the things about Japanese people is that they are very modest, they are very clean people, or they strive to be. So the humiliation of having to do all of these things in public must have been absolutely horrific for these people. We're not idiots. We do know that this was war, and we know that Pearl Harbor was a horrific act of war, unprovoked act of war by Japan. It just seems so unfair that all of these people, some of which had never even set foot in Japan, had no loyalty to Japan. California was such a high target, and so they did not want Japanese people relaying information and etc. like they had done in Hawaii. So, I mean, I get that it was war, but it just also feels very, very unfair. We're here now at one of the canteens, and one of the things I just keep wondering as I was walking around was, how did they feed this many people out in the desert? Well, it turns out that they actually had farms. There was 400 acres of farmland to the north and south of the camp. They had orchards with 600 and 700 apple trees and pear trees.
They bought this land because there was places for them to build farms. The incarcerated Japanese that were here built the farms.
Wow. They had chicken ranch, they had a hog farm, and they produced hundreds and hundreds, sometimes millions of pounds of food for one chicken eggs. 1,366,620 eggs in total. And what it doesn't tell, it has a sample of the food production. So I don't know whether that was a year, whether it was over the entire time they were here, but other things like 7,000 pounds of bean sprouts per month.
The incarcerated Japanese were recruited to build channels from creeks and to clear the fields and to build the irrigation for it and to then plant and harvest the fields. They did everything. They had a pickling plant right here. They had the chicken ranches here. There was an orchard right here as well. There were already existing orchards that were here. And then these north and south agricultural fields are all adjacent to the camp. We have walked over from the visitor center is over that way, and the two barracks, an example of one of the latrines, and now we're going into example of one of the mess halls right here, and let's go inside and have a look. This is just one of about 10 of these mess halls that were built. This is a recreation, obviously. Again, nothing was left here apart from a few buildings. What were the buildings that were left here? None of these are all recreations.
Yeah. The only original building here now is the auditorium, and that was actually kind of built really late, and then the firehouse. So those are the only original buildings. So these are all reconstructions, but this is just how it looked. It probably didn't look this good though.
If I get a little closer to here, these are pictures of what it looked like, and I'm sure they used those pictures to recreate as close as possible to what was here. Here's another picture right here. They're kind of cool because you can see right through them, pretend that it was here. They look exactly the same almost, yeah. Here's a picture of some of the fields right next to the camp.
The first dinner served here was on March 21st in 1942. It was army rations. The cooks slept in unfinished mess halls next to the only operating stove. So they tried to feed 84 people from that one stove. By the end of April, they had 10 mess halls, but then they struggled to feed 7,000 people. By late of 1942, each mess hall served 3 meals a day to about 300 people. And they worked around the clock. They worked from 3 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day.
Now we finished the exhibits that you can look at, the buildings, I'll take this silly hat off, the buildings that you can go in, the reconstructed buildings, and now you do a driving tour which allows you to visit places that have not been reconstructed but are still here. All of this open space that is now covered in brush and trees and stuff was barracks. There was how many blocks, Kevin?
They were all similar to the block that we visited. There's 36 of these, each with 14 barracks, a mess hall, the 2 latrines, and also a recreation hall, which was the same size as the mess hall. And all of these blocks had fire breaks around. They would put 4 blocks together and then have a fire break around those 4.
Wow.
And then another 4 together.
They did have a fire department here, and this is their fire station. It was manned entirely by the Japanese themselves, and from June 1942 to July 1945, they extinguished 91 fires.
This is the John Shepherd Ranch. The Shepherd Ranch was one of the earliest Euro-American settlements in the southern Owens Valley. John Shepherd settled here in 1864 and raised cattle. By 1900, the Shepherd Ranch encompassed 1,700 acres. Much of it would become the Manzanar War Reclamation Center. There is little left of this stunning home that once stood here but this fireplace. The National Park Service and volunteers are replanting fruit trees in the orchards. The town of Manzanar existed before the camp was here, and it was a 3,000-acre fruit orchard community.
We visited the camp over 2 days, simply because it was far too hot on the first day to walk around.
We have come to the old fish pond. They were allowed to create these beautiful gardens, and what you have to remember is, yes, it was hot and dusty, but also they had much more water here at the time.
You can see the water came from this trench here.
Look at this, isn't it pretty? You have to kind of use your imagination as to what this would have been like with decorations around it and maybe some flowers and so on.
Here we are now at the Rose Garden. This Rose Garden began in 1942 by Kuchiro and Akira Nishi brothers, and they operated a nursery in Los Angeles that specialized in roses. And most of these they took from clippings, and then they would graft them onto wild roses. Then they were allowed to send out for seeds and saplings. It was started as a rose garden, it became the Pleasure Park, and it later became Merritt Park. But this would have once been a place for people to come and meet, have some solitude. It was reported that young couples dating would come here to get away from their parents, etc. But it is beautiful. Now, whether these roses are roses that were originally here, I doubt it. Kevin and I were talking yesterday after we left and talked about how it's difficult to explain the emotions that you feel here. But it's not a fun place to visit. It's very educational, it's extremely interesting, and it does portray what some people call one of the darkest times in American history, but it is certainly somewhere, like Kevin said, that we should never forget and come and honor the people that were incarcerated here. But now we are at the Japanese Gardens and it's beautiful. They have done such a great job of renovating this. Merritt Park was an oasis of beauty and solitude for a crowded, confined community. Meandering paths and waterways, bridges, lawns and flower gardens filled its 1.5 acres, delighting the senses and lifting the spirits of many who came here. Internee landscaper designer Kiichiro Nishi created the park in 1943 together with floriculturist Tak Muto and a crew of internee workers, all employed by the War Relocation Authority. Below a waterfall at the pond's west end, a large turtle rock represented longevity. A gazebo built of locust wood stood on a concrete foundation nearby, and 2 upright stones marked the park's southern corners. Nishi dedicated his work to the memory of fellow Japanese immigrants who, although ushered to this place with the breaking of friendly relations between 2 countries, have come to enjoy this quiet, peaceful land. You could face away from the barracks, look past a tiny rapids towards the darkening mountains, and for a while not be a prisoner at all. You could just hang suspended in some odd, almost lovely land you could not escape from, yet almost did not want to leave. Jean Wakatsuki Houston. Over the decades, Merritt Park disappeared under several feet of sand, but in 2008, Kiichiro Nishi's children and grandchildren returned to assist National Park Service staff and volunteers in unearthing the park. While the water that once flowed through the ponds and the plants that grace the park are gone, the stones remain as a testament to beauty created behind barbed wire. Well, here we are now. We are just about to enter the cemetery. There are actually only 6 graves here, including the first person to die, who was Matsunosuke Murakami. He was 62, and he was the first of 150 men, women, and children who died here. And the first person who actually died here that I mentioned earlier is still buried here. He is still laid to rest here in this cemetery.
The origami cranes represent remembrance for the deceased, hope for peace, and are a powerful symbol of Japanese-American resilience in the face of injustice.
We've stopped again now at the hospital complex. This is at the very far end of the camp. From the foundations here and what looks like a pathway, I think this would have been the main entrance to the hospital, but we're going to go read the storyboard. When the camp first opened, there were no medical facilities whatsoever. There was 1 barrack and there were 5 doctors to treat 10,000 people. In July of 1942, patients and staff and equipment finally moved into a 250-bed hospital. In 16 connected buildings, the hospital housed operating rooms, laboratories, pharmacies, dental and eye clinics, a morgue and staff quarters. Over a period of 3.5 years, the hospital staff treated more than 70,000 cases. Most of the hospital workers were Japanese Americans. Adjacent to the hospital, we have another garden. There was a hospital garden here. Again, imagine this lush green, looking more pleasant to walk around than it does now. The doctors' quarters were here on this left end, and the nurses' quarters were all the way on the other end to keep them separated, because of course back then all doctors were men and all nurses were women. We'll have the foundations and the steps that led up to the doctors' quarters were up there. Next stop on our tour of Manzanar is the Children's Village.
The Children's Village basically is an orphanage. They were brought from West Coast institutions, orphanages, and other foster homes. They pulled the Japanese children from these institutions who had no families and brought them here. Others were temporarily separated from their families because their parents were arrested or had become ill, or were infants born to unwed mothers.
We had a good long talk with the ranger, and she explained that there were 100 children brought here from 2 different orphanages, one in San Francisco and one in Los Angeles. These orphanages were specifically for Japanese orphans, or orphans of mixed ethnicity. And the reason that they had to come here, they obviously weren't a threat. The reason was that the people who ran it left these children, abandoned these children. They cut off the telephone lines, they cut off the water. So therefore, there was literally nobody to look after these children. This orchard is named Silent Survivors. This is a remnant of orchard from a time when hundreds of apples and pear and peach trees and orchards occupied the Manzanar landscape. Since the Wilder plantation was here, he planted hundreds of trees in 1918 and they thrived. In 1942, the Japanese internees pruned and thinned 40 acres of these abandoned orchards, and they harvested thousands of crates of fruits that they then used in the mess halls. After 1945, when the camp closed, all the way up to 1992, many of the trees died, but you can see here, these trees have survived. So they were planted in 1918, they're over 100 years old. We made our way back to the visitors center. Inside, you will experience more of the life at the internment camp. Do not miss this amazing exhibition. Here we have a scale model of Manzanar. There were 36 blocks here, and each block had approximately 14 buildings. So here we can see just how big this place was. It was an entire city. There was even an airfield across the road. So this is where we are now. This building right here is the auditorium, and that's where we're at. And then this on the far corner right here, these were the properties and the living quarters of the staff that were here working the camps. Each person was given an identification tag, which they had to wear, and a number. It does definitely feel not dissimilar to what the Germans did, but of course these people were not ill-treated in the sense that they were in Germany and Poland. What isn't highly documented is that America was not the only country to do this to Japanese people. 7 days after the United States made the decision to create these internment camps and round up every person of Japanese descent, the Canadian government did the exact same thing. 20,881 Japanese persons were rounded up and put in internment camps very similar to this in Canada. Immediately after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt opposed the roundup and internment of Japanese citizens. He was quoted as saying, "An American citizen is, after all, an American citizen, and it would be unconstitutional to intern them in these camps." That was right after Pearl Harbor, which of course was in December 7th of 1941. By February of the following year, he had completely changed his opinion. He was quoted as saying, "The Japanese race is an enemy race." He directed the removal of all Japanese citizens from the census of 1940 along the West Coast. There were real concerns that the Japanese were going to invade Los Angeles. There had been a Japanese submarine allegedly spotted off the coast of California. These were legitimate, at the time, concerns. Again, it's such a difficult situation, isn't it? Anyone of Japanese ancestry that was actually considered a legitimate threat was segregated to Tule Lake, and this was much more of a prison. These were people who were considered political prisoners or actual threats to the safety of the United States, and specifically the West Coast. Eventually there were 10,000 people who were transferred to Tule Lake. I think it's important to remember that Japanese Americans, the Nisei, so the ones that were born here and were given citizenship, fought during World War II. Over 1,400 in one corps were reduced to 521 members by the end of the war. Talked a little bit about the earnings and their money. There was actually a Bank of America bank on site at the city. It was a city, of course. And what would they buy? Well, they would have access to the Sears Roebuck catalog, and they were allowed to order things from the Sears Roebuck catalog. So as the months progressed into years, they were able to buy things like furniture and things that made life here just a little easier for them. Although this was an internment camp, there was no forced labor here. Everybody who worked did it by choice, because honestly, what else would they do? But there are people who didn't work, of course, didn't have that money to buy things. So even in this internment camp where everybody was considered equal, it was not. There was a hierarchy. There were people who were very well off. There were people who were very dirt poor. But you could work and you could earn money, and that's how they got things from the Sears Roebuck catalog. The people who worked in the factories that made things like camouflage netting and did all of the farming and built all of these buildings like the hospital, they did get paid. People who worked in the farms and so on earned about $14 a month. People who worked in the factories making things for the war effort could earn up to 15, 16. People like doctors and so on would earn close to 19, 20. These are actual pieces of furniture that were made from fruit crates, and then they had made shell jewelry. Look at the beautiful workmanship of this. I mean, made from fruit crates. It's incredible, isn't it? They had two different places of worship here. They had a Catholic church, but they also had a Buddhist temple. They also had a dojo here where they would learn Taekwondo, but also they would learn Judo. Manzanar has become synonymous with the internment camps, but it was not the only one. There were actually 10 different internment camps, all the way from Washington State and then all the way down to Southern California. Very happy faces as they are leaving Manzanar. The sad thing was that most of them had lost their homes and their properties and so on. Some of them were lucky to put things in storage. Of course, it wasn't just the problems of being here and losing almost everything they had. They then had to work out how to live after here. Couldn't get jobs, they couldn't get housing. It was very, very difficult.
If you're in this area and you want to visit Manzanar and you think, oh, it's too hot, or I can't walk, or it's too far, just come to the visitor center and do the driving tour. If you come in the visitor center, and you can have examples of the different buildings are right here where it's cool, you don't have to be outside, and then you can take the car tour and look at the places outside. It's great. We hope you enjoyed our 2-day tour of Manzanar. We stayed at Independence Creek, just outside of Lone Pine. Join us next week as we return to Lone Pine, Alabama Hills, and the Movie Museum. Until then, we'll see you on the trail.